Today we're going to discuss Chapter 1, which looks at the scope and challenge of international marketing. But before we get into the chapter proper, I just want to mention something about the PowerPoint slides for this class. The PowerPoint slides are actually geared for the instructor rather than the student. They tend to be limited and short because they're actually cues for the instructor in order for the instructor to be able to discuss the things that he finds relevant in this particular chapter. So if you plan on using the PowerPoint slides for your as for, in view of a textbook, you're going to find that this is not a good thing to do, and you may regret it since many of the things that are discussed by the professor are actually, in fact, from the lecture that is related very much to the text uh, chapter. So, what you're going to see is that you're better off actually watching the video lecture and also reading the textbook. Every chapter begins with a food for thought, and today's food for thought would be the question, why should business people study international marketing even if they do not plan to do international business? The short answer to this question is because the international business environment affects domestic businesses. For example, if there's a drought in Brazil and the coffee production drops, but demand for coffee beans continue to increase, then you will find that prices of those coffee beans will rise, and therefore it may affect your domestic business if you have a franchise for, say, Starbucks. So that's one illustration of why you should study international business. Another reason that you should, in fact, study international business is because what you're going to find, people's demands and needs actually change as a result of their exposure to different cultural changes throughout the world, especially with technology. So, what you're going to, in fact, realize that is that, you know, the only constant thing about change is change itself. So, if we don't know what's happening or what's changing in the international business environment, the likelihood that we will succeed or our business will succeed will be much less. Now, I talked about change, and we have to say that change is inevitable. But the change that we're looking at would be the change in the business world. For one thing, many US businesses are going abroad. They're looking for new markets. And in this context, you're going to find that American businesses are becoming increasingly internationalized. And when we say being, increasingly internationalized, American firms being increasingly internationalized, it could mean a number of things. For one thing, you're going to find that many foreign companies now own, US companies. For example, Chrysler, or rather, is owned by Fiat. And therefore, it's an Italian company owning an American car manufacturer, right? But you're also going to find is that there are many banks that have foreign owners. And this means that there could be instances where these foreign owners will impose their business culture on US companies and its product lines. One more reason why firms are going overseas is because domestic markets are becoming more mature. And when we say they're becoming more mature, they're becoming more competitive. And at this point of the product life cycle, you're going to find that price becomes the weapon of choice when we are competing in domestic markets. But in, let me just backtrack for a minute, mature domestic markets. Now, if in fact, you know, we don't actually start marketing to new markets, our revenue as well as our profits are going to shrink because of the fact that when you compete using price as the weapon, then the thing that happens is that you end up having a smaller and smaller and smaller margin. But in addition to that, you're going to find we have what is known as global competition. Many companies, they're not necessarily buying US companies, but they're creating, competing products for these companies. And a good example of that is Samsung, who's now competing with Apple, right? And what you're going to find is they're good at it because they have learned from from the people or the firms that have actually started the business. So what you're going to see is that in addition to the fact that they have lower cost structures, you're going to see that they also are able to market their products effectively. Think about the two leading producers of cell phones. You have, first of all, you have what do you call this? Apple, and the other would be, in fact, Samsung, which is a Korean company. And what you're going to find is that they tend to, in fact, uh, try to, grab market share both in the United States as well as in other countries. Now, the good thing about a multinational is that it's able to produce goods in other countries at a cheaper cost. And this is one reason why multinationals tend to outperform purely domestic US firms. But one of the other things that you're going to find is that we have to discuss the markets, not just the firms. The markets are the buyers. And guess what? Buyers today in many markets have very similar wants and needs and demands. Like what? Well, think about iPhones. They all want iPhones, but you don't necessarily want the same iPhone. For example, the gold colored iPhones are much more in demand in the Asian part of the world rather than in the American part of the world. And of course, if the markets are substantial and there's not many players in that market, then you have the potential to increase your revenue and your profits. And this is one reason why firms are really reaching out to try to invade or attempt to penetrate large untapped markets. Let's define international marketing. It's the performance of big business activities designed to plan, price, promote, and direct the flow of a firm's goods and services to consumers or users in more than one nation, usually for a profit. What does this international marketing definition entail? It tells you that first of all, that it goes through more than one market. A nation can be an entire market like the United States, right? So it has to go to more than one country. So if it's just, California to Nevada, that's not international marketing. It has to go from one country to another. And secondly, you're going to find the four P's, the pricing, the promotion, and the flow, which is the distribution of goods and services, which is the product to consumers or users, is essentially the marketing mix, the only tools that we have as marketers. And talking about tools, you will find that there are two sets of things that we have to consider when we, in fact, look at what an international marketer has to do. First of all, you have to examine your tools because not every country has the same tools as we find here in the United States. So you're going to see what tools would you be able to use in a particular market. And it's not the case that if you use it in the home country, which is the United States, it's going to be the same tools that you can use in another country. Why? Because the international business environment actually may be different. And speaking of the environments, we have two sets of environments that we need to consider in contrast to doing domestic marketing. If we're doing domestic environment, rather marketing, we would only need to consider the domestic and controllable environment. And what are some of these environments? The political, the legal, the economic environment, the social economic or the social cultural environment, and so forth and so on, right? So, in the domestic and controllable environments, for example, we would consider the laws of this country. For example, what you're going to find in the United States, at least in the state of California, it is allowed to actually consume marijuana for recreational purposes, right? So we can do distribution of the product. We can have a product line consisting of cookies, candy that actually has marijuana. But please, okay, don't actually bring it to another country without checking the environment of that country. Because if you do, you may end up, you know, being put in prison because of the fact they don't necessarily, you know, allow this in their countries. So countries like Russia, and you probably heard of the Britney Griner story, right? Or South Korea, they have a different set of laws and political environment and cultural environment, which may in fact not allow you to bring in that kind of products. So that will impact your decision to enter a particular market. But if you find a market that seems, in fact, an ideal market for your products, and that the laws are friendly to you, you may still need to make changes to your product lines or the way you do marketing because of the fact that you may not end up being able to sell a lot of your products. For example, think about shampoo. You buy shampoo by the bottle, and you actually buy relatively a large amount because it's in the big bottles. But at the same time, you're going to find that in other countries, they cannot afford to buy, you know, this product, the shampoo, in big amounts. So they buy sachets of this, shampoo, and they only, shampoo once a week, not as often as Americans do. This is an illustration of the need for environmental adaptation. One of the key things that we have to understand is that there are actually roadblocks to doing, international marketing. And the key to success sometimes means we have to overcome, you know, mental blocks, such as the self reference criterion. The self reference criterion essentially is a unconscious bias on our part that says that, you know, since it's acceptable for us to do these things, it must be acceptable in all parts of the world. Well, look at Brittany Griner. She wasn't really buying marijuana for distribution. She was doing it for her personal recreation. And she ended up staying in a jail for months. So, this is one of the key things that can block your ability to do effective international marketing. The other is a closely related concept called ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism means, if you in fact are, do or accept a particular, concept or a business practice, then everybody should in fact also do the same thing. What we're essentially saying here is that you know, uh, if the United States allows, for example, or let me rephrase the example. Okay, if a foreign country actually, allows what do you call this punishment by of theft by cutting off the hands, and we hear about it, then we think that's barbaric. That shouldn't be allowed. That is an example of ethnocentrism because we're saying our culture allows this or does not allow this, and therefore you should do the same. And the difference between self reference criterion and ethnocentrism is one is, unconscious bias, whereas ethnocentrism is a conscious thing. So, for example, what you're going to find is that in some countries of the world, when men greet other men, they kiss each other on the cheek. How many of the men in the class are willing to do that? And what you're going to find is that that creates a barrier because we're setting ourselves up to be different from the people we want from the market that we want to enter. And therefore, what do we need to do? We need to develop what we call global awareness in order to minimize, not necessarily eliminate everything, but minimize any uh, kinds of self reference criterion or ethnocentrism, which are barriers to succeeding in international business. First of all, we should tolerate cultural differences. We should not always think that the American culture is, in fact, the best. But the other thing, too, is that we should have a knowledge of cultures, world history, world market potential, and global economic, social, and technological trends. We have to actually look at the big picture. We cannot only focus on very, very limited things because it may, in fact, uh, become a barrier to trade. Why? How could it become a barrier to trade? Well, if people think the only reason, if let me rephrase that, if foreigners think that you're only here to in their country to try to earn or gain more revenue and earn more profits, then they may feel that you have no interest but yourself, your own interests. You don't really care about them. And one way to signal to other cultures that you, in fact, are interested to make sure that they also benefit from trade with you would be to, in fact, you know, have a knowledge of these various things that I mentioned so that in talking to them, you would be able to incorporate it in your discussions. So, how do we, in fact, create a way to ensure that we don't have these barriers that may define our relationship with other countries or other markets. First of all, what you should do is you should define the business problem in home country cultural traits, habits, or norms. So, for example, our business problem is this: what kind of toppings should our pizza actually have? So, if you think about it, in the United States, we have things like, pepperoni, cheese, what do you call this? Anchovies, green peppers, and so forth and so on. And then you, in fact, define the same problem, but taking into account your host country cultural traits, habits, or norms through consultation with nationals of that country. So think about it for a minute. What if they say, well, we want sea urchin, you know, or we want snake meat? Well, that can actually be surprising to you, but not to them. Actually, there's a fish called pubu in Japan uh, that has a that can actually uh, you know um, kill you if you eat it, unless it's prepared correctly, right? And you may say, oh, if it's going to be risky to have that, I certainly don't want to do that. But there you're already making a value judgment. But you shouldn't. You shouldn't do that until you have finished the analysis. Then isolate the SRC or self reference criterion influence in the problem and examine it carefully to see how it complicates the problem. So it's you know it's the bias in from our culture, and you say, well, we don't eat sea urchin, and no, we don't eat snake, right? And therefore you'll find that with that pizza that is it's just serving that is being that only has that cheese, pepperoni, and whatever it is that we generally use here in the United States as toppings, you know may not do very well in Japan. But once you, in fact, redefine the problem, okay, without thinking that, hey, um, you know, I don't like snake, people in the United States don't like snake meat. They don't like sea urchin, right? But the Japanese do. And therefore, because of this, you're going to find that, hey, we make pizza with anchovy and pepperoni in for sale in the United States, but for Japan we would have something quite different. Uh, what I just want to mention that for me, even though I teach international marketing, uh, it happens to me because of the fact that I grew up in a different culture. And for me, snake meat is not, in fact, something I'd like to eat. Sea urchin, it's a very different thing. But it's not just in Japan. Many of us would not eat escargot. You know what escargot is? It's the French word for snails, but it's very yummy. If you actually have a chance to try it, you know, uh, make make no value judgment about it until you have tried it, because you may like it very much. Uh, i would i used to think that I would not like snails, but once I tried it, I like it very much. One of the things you're going to find is that international marketing does not happen overnight. Instead, what you're going to see is that when we actually decide we want to go into international marketing, it is actually a sequential, step by step, process. And we begin with no direct foreign marketing. In this case, what happens is that we may have excess production. Yeah, okay, so we have uh, uh, production over capacity, right? So we produce too many of them. And if we sell it in the domestic market, prices will go down because supply exceeds demand, right? But if we sell it overseas, problem solved, right? So we find companies who will buy it from us and sell it overseas. And that's no direct foreign marketing. We also may not have the people to do it because you need some specialized knowledge. In fact, at one point, the Swiss company Logitech. Yes, that it's a Swiss company, right? They have their offices in Fremont. They wanted to hire me because they didn't have the expertise and the knowledge to actually expand to Latin America. And by the way, their sales office, is actually in Miami, not even in Latin America, right? So you're going to find that because they lacked that expertise, they wanted me to be the one to, in fact, institute their foreign marketing. I had to turn it down because at the time I had my commitments to Cal State East Bay. Another, then the next step after no direct foreign marketing is infrequent foreign marketing. Okay, we had the production over capacity, production excess production runs, and what's happening is that it happened again and again, and we keep selling direct foreign marketing, right? But no direct foreign marketing. So what you're going to find is that we start thinking, hey, I'm giving away too much. Why? Because, the distributor, the one who's buying from me and selling it overseas, is making all this money and I'm not making as much money. So maybe I should try. So you have what we call infrequent foreign marketing, in which case you now sell your excess production overseas on your own, instead of hiring a third party. But as you gain expertise, you start now selling more regularly, and that's why we call it regular foreign marketing. And you're saying, oh, this is good. I'm generating a lot of revenue. So let's sell to more countries. Let's sell to more markets. But selling to a country like Japan is not like selling to a country like Brazil or to the United Kingdom or to South Africa. So what you're going to find is that you may have to alter your four P's, your product, price, place, and promotion, to suit the needs of each of these markets. But the converse can also happen. You can, in fact, identify countries that have common needs, common wants, and create a common marketing mix that you can use regardless of the market. So, this is what is known as global marketing.